Hello and welcome. I'm Leanne Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. The US launches Christmas Day strikes against ISIS-linked militants in Nigeria. Zelensky says a meeting with Trump is happening soon as US peace proposals spark talks with Moscow. And Japan approves a record defense budget as tensions with China escalate over space and military developments. Now, the US has carried out strikes against ISIS-linked militants in northwestern Nigeria. President Trump praised the Christmas Day strikes and said the group was primarily targeting and killing innocent Christians. Meanwhile, Nigerian officials said the operation was planned jointly and focused on fighting terrorists, not any religion. For more on this, I'm joined by Nigerian journalist Mayowa Adegoke. Thank you so much, Mayowa, for your time today. First of all, what do we know about these strikes? And did they come as a surprise to people in Nigeria?
Thank you, Leanne. It's good to see you again. And, just a few weeks ago, we were on discussing this very, topic when Trump said, I'm coming to Nigeria, and everybody was like, hold your horses. Well, it's happened, and it's quite interesting. We don't have as many details as we would love to have. So a few things are clear. The U.S. Africa Command was very instrumental in this attack. Multiple fatalities confirmed. We don't have actual numbers. We know that this happened in Sokoto State, targeting ISIS-affiliated groups. So this much we know about it. And of course, as you mentioned, Nigeria says it was well aware. It also coordinated and collaborated on this attack. Does it come as a surprise? Yes, a huge Christmas surprise to many people, and one that's, I'd say welcome, because ultimately everyone wants to get rid of these bad guys.
And it's really interesting because, as you did say, of course, we were talking about this recently and about the threats Donald Trump made. But data does not suggest Christians are uniquely persecuted in Nigeria. Does this put the Nigerian government in a difficult position with the Trump administration?
So in the aftermath of the announcement, one thing that we've seen is how on the US side, the narrative is, quite religious in nature. They have associated this with, Christianity and the attack against Christians in Nigeria. Even the US, president also talking about this Christmas gift, so to speak, and even wishing the dead terrorists a Merry Christmas. His Secretary of War has also, toward the same line, making this quite religious in nature. While on the other side, the Nigerian government continues to insist this has no religious coloring. And just as they have said previously, this is just about Nigerians, and terrorism affects both Christians and Muslims. Now, to your question, does this put the Nigerian government in a difficult position with the United States? I wouldn't say difficult position, because as we've seen, what's most important is that work is getting done, and ultimately, everybody's just spinning their own narrative. And I suppose with Nigeria being a sovereign nation, they can continue to weave their own narrative and insist on how they see things. But one thing is clear, the United States has put a religious coloring to this whole situation.
And what does the US intervention say about the Nigerian government's ability to fight its own battles?
Good question. It is. I mean, this has been a dent on the Nigerian, the state, and different governments over time. Well, yeah, my son decided to join the show. So
that's okay. Let him join in.
So you see, it's quite a shame, honestly, how Nigeria has continued to battle terrorism over the years, not with as much success as we would like. But ultimately, support is needed. Let's not focus on, you can do it, or you cannot do it, or you can keep your house, or you can't keep your house. It is that Nigeria needs support. Terrorism is an international issue, and Boko Haram and all these other terrorist organizations in the region do not only impact Nigeria as such. So support is welcome. And ultimately, I believe that Nigeria will be looking to get in the support that helps it catch its own fish, as opposed to being given fish, if you understand what I mean.
And will these strikes make Nigeria safer in the future? You're in Nigeria at the moment. Of course, we've seen your son with you. You live in the country. What are the hopes for the Nigerian people and the families?
Well, this first strike we've seen, going by reports, they say it's been successful, multiple fatalities confirmed. From different statements, it doesn't seem like this will be the first and last. So we expect that perhaps there will be more in the coming days, weeks, or months. But ultimately, what will make Nigeria safer is that the Nigerian government, the Nigerian people are empowered to fight their own battles from within, as opposed to help coming from outside. It's a long way to go. Terrorism is not something that you clear out overnight. So definitely, it's a long way to go, and every support as well.
And just a really quick question. Do you think we'll see retaliation from any of the ISIS groups that are currently in Nigeria? Do you think that's a concern for the international world?
I suppose that it should be expected. I mean, you are fighting against people who have been at it for a number of years, who are quite adamant in their convictions and unyielding in their convictions, regardless whether it's negative. So I expect that authorities who are well informed, just better off in terms of security intelligence than I am, to expect some kind of retaliation and, neutralize it, hopefully.
Mayowa Adegoke, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you on. Let's continue this conversation now with Greg Swenson, Chair of Republican Overseas. Greg, thank you so much. We were just talking to our reporter there from Nigeria, who did say to the Nigerian people these strikes actually came as a surprise. But what do you make of US airstrikes targeting so-called ISIS militants in northwestern Nigeria overnight?
Well, I think it was a positive move because the president gave ample warning to ISIS and to Boko Haram and to anybody who was committing these atrocities. So, the president always wants to use diplomacy first. He mentioned this over a month ago. And so I think this was, somewhat expected. But I think the most important takeaway here is the fact that it was with the cooperation of the Nigerian government. And that's what's, I think, really a key aspect here is that, I don't think going against the government, it would have created just a rift between or widen the gap between the government and the terrorists. And I think it was important to have that cooperation. So it's not seen as some kind of a regime change or intervention. This was assisting the Nigerian government to execute something that they couldn't do themselves.
And Greg, it's really interesting because data doesn't suggest Christians are uniquely persecuted in Nigeria. Yeah. Violence appears evenly distributed across Muslim and Christian groups in the country. Actually, on Christmas Eve, we saw a bomb in a mosque in northeastern Nigeria. Do you think Pete Hegseth and President Donald Trump are misinformed?
No, I don't think so. I think it's very clear to the Americans that, these religious jihadists kill more of their own people or kill more Muslims than they do anybody else. And so, I don't think that's that's not new news. I mean, we could talk about killing Israelis, we could talk about killing Christians, but they'll kill anybody. And I think that's what's important here. The fact that it's Christians and there is anti-Christian violence around the world, but such a high percentage of it, well over half of the violence against Christians is taking place in Nigeria. So I think it's a particular hotspot for that. And so, but it's killing anybody. That's the problem. And I think the U.S. government is willing to use military force in a very tactical and targeted way to stop violence against, innocent victims. I'm not sure the outcome here. I'm sure there will be some retaliation, but this is apples and oranges. I mean, the fact that the president has experience with eliminating ISIS like he did in his first term in the Middle East, it's always temporary, of course, but I do think that the capabilities are not exactly a fair fight here. So I would hope that the terrorists are sensible enough not to try to retaliate.
And President Trump promised, didn't he, America first. The strike on Nigeria comes just a week after an operation in Syria. How will his MAGA base react to even more foreign intervention from the president?
It's a great question, and there's always going to be that debate between, the different wings, maybe the more isolationist wing of the party. And that's healthy debate. I think that's good news that there is that debate. But I think that, America first is not America alone, and we want what's best for our own interests, but we also want what's best for the West's interest, for our allies' interest, and in this case, Nigeria's interest. And as you said earlier in the segment, this has ramifications for other countries in the region. So, no, I think it's important to always differentiate between America first and America alone. And I think if there is pushback from within the party, I think that will be okay. That's just healthy debate. But in this case, there are innocent people being killed. If we could stop it without creating a new conflict, much of the criticism about Iraq and Afghanistan is we, in some ways, created a new generation of terrorists. And in this case, I don't think that's the case here, because these terrorists, as you pointed out, have been at this for a long time. And it's really cruel what they're doing to their people in Nigeria.
But Greg, as everyone knows, there's always a risk of destabilization in these regions when it comes to foreign intervention. And I don't think that is something that can be ignored. But I just wanted to talk to you about a post on X. It shows Trump's team praying for him. The post claims that he is protecting Christians around the world and even suggesting divine favor. Do you think these kinds of religiously framed narratives risk turning Trump into an idol? And also, how should the Republicans respond to this? Because, we heard from our reporter in Nigeria earlier who said the Nigerian government is trying to distance itself from the religious focus when it comes to battling ISIS in the country. And I just wonder what you make of these posts on X.
Well, it's a great point. And I think, again, to reiterate, the fact that there was cooperation with the Nigerian government is really important here. And so this is not regime change. This is not a foreign. Really, I think a foreign intervention might even be exaggerating. What we're trying to do is save innocent people from being victimized. I'm not suggesting that the U.S. military wants to do anything that will alter the government. And they have a good point. They're in a different position. The Nigerian government has to balance that, given that it's roughly 50% Muslim and 50% Christian. They don't want to get escalate this thing into more religious opposition or religious differences. But for the Americans, it's different. It's a Christian country founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and so I think defending Judeo-Christian people around the world is something that they can wear on their sleeve in the military. That's okay. But I understand why it's a different perspective for the Nigerian government.
Greg Swenson, brilliant to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me and for your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines around the world today. A security officer at Saudi Arabia's Grand Mosque in Mecca was injured while trying to stop a man who jumped from the mosque's upper levels. The incident occurred at the popular Masjid al-Haram, and both the officer and the man are receiving medical care. At least 5 people were killed and 21 others injured in an explosion at an Alawite mosque in the Syrian city of Homs during Friday prayers. Authorities say an explosive device went off inside. No group has claimed responsibility, while rescuers continue to search through debris at that site. The Israeli army says it has carried out strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, hitting weapons depots and training complex. This comes despite a November 2024 ceasefire meant to end over a year of fighting between Israel and the Iranian-backed group. Now, 2 men are missing after going for a swim at a beach in England on Christmas Day. A Coast Guard search has been called off after authorities were unable to locate the 2 men aged in their 40s and 60s. Police in Devon and Cornwall are urging public to stay out of the water. And heavy storms across California have killed at least 3 people. The severe weather has triggered landslides and widespread flooding, forcing evacuations in several areas. Around 100,000 residents are without power as rescuers continue to pull stranded travelers from submerged vehicles. And finally, a US judge has blocked the detention of British social media campaigner who took legal action against the US government. Imran Ahmed, a US permanent resident, has been granted a temporary block after he filed legal complaints against State Secretary Marco Rubio and US Attorney General Pam Bondi. Now to Ukraine, where President Zelensky says a meeting with Donald Trump will happen soon. Meanwhile, Putin's foreign policy aide has been speaking to members of the Trump administration after Moscow received US proposals about a possible peace deal. As the diplomatic push to end the war continues, conflicting demands by Moscow and Kyiv do remain. For more on this, I'm joined by Ben Auris, founder and editor-in-chief of BNE Intally News. Ben, as always, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me. So, President Zelensky says a meeting with Donald Trump will happen soon. Does this signal progress in talks to end the 4-year war?
Absolutely. I'm becoming increasingly optimistic that a deal is very close. There's been intense talks here in Berlin 10 days ago, and that was followed up by another round, a second round in Miami between the US representatives and the Kiev team. And they seem to be making progress. According to the American side, about 90% of the points on this original 28-point plan have been agreed in principle, although not in detail. However, the gap between the two sides remains large. There's these 2 sticking points, the question of who controls the territory, who owns the occupied territory. And Ukraine is insisting on ironclad Article 5-like security guarantees that it needs to secure its borders in the post-war scenario to prevent Russia invading for a second time. However, the noises coming out of Vancouver, out of the Ukrainian presidential administration, are increasingly encouraging. And Zelensky's playing up this meeting that's going to happen in Florida, Mar-a-Lago, directly between himself and Trump, as a possible breakthrough. And the fact that the 2 presidents are supposed to meet face to face is significant because Trump has said previously that he doesn't want to meet either Zelensky nor Putin unless the deal is close. So everyone's going to be watching this weekend's meeting very closely because there is a possibility that we get a peace deal out of it this weekend.
Yeah, cautious optimism, isn't there, Ben, at the moment? But I find it interesting because reports in the Russian newspaper Kommersant claim Putin has indicated that Moscow could actually be open to swapping territory as part of a Ukraine deal. You mentioned the sticking points there. So what do you make of this?
Well, exactly. What they're looking for is for some diplomatic formula, because on the one hand, Putin's been insisting that the Ukrainian forces leave the Donetsk region, the part of the 2 regions in Donbass. Russians only control about 85% of it, and they want Ukrainians to withdraw from that last 15%. However, this is the sticking point. Zelensky has insisted that he's not going to give up any land at all. And moreover, recent polls in Kiev show that the Ukrainian population is willing for him to make compromises to get peace, but they're dead against giving up any land that's not occupied by the Russians. So it's very tricky. So what we're looking for is some sort of diplomatic formulation that basically allows him to give up land without, saying the word withdrawal. And land swaps have been suggested as one way of doing this. Zelensky gives up the key Donetsk piece of land that Putin's after, but at the same time receives in return more occupied lands. And then maybe he can sell that to the public. This is classic diplomacy, realpolitik.
And it's really interesting.
Everything will turn on the formulation.
Apologies. But like you said, it's classic diplomacy, shuttle diplomacy, really. But I'm also really interested right now where Europe stands in all of this, because they were instrumental, weren't they, in really speaking to Donald Trump and being on Ukraine's side. However, Russia has been very critical of Europe and NATO, and especially when it comes to security guarantees. So what sort of role is Europe playing right now as we see this cautious optimism that a deal could be pushed over the line?
Well, Europe has been extremely vocal. I mean, after the original proposal 28 plan that was thrashed out between the Kremlin and the US side came out, Europe put its 2 cents in, but it came up with various versions that were completely unacceptable to the Russians. And the Russians have said repeatedly that any European suggestions are going to be rejected out of hand. And for Europe, it's a security problem too, because they have the Russian army in their backyard fighting a full-scale classic war. And the threat and the fear is that Russia, after it's finished with Ukraine, will move on and invade the Baltic states or Poland, or one of the, there's been drone incursions into Poland, Romania, multiple EU members. However, because the Russians have stuck their heels in and said, look, we're not dealing with Europe at all, that the US side has basically cut Europe out. So it's put forward these suggestions, it's made a lot of noise, but it's not at the table. And again, the key meeting this weekend is going to be between Zelensky, Ukraine, and Trump, and Europe is not involved. So I think that's what's going to happen, is that they'll agree a deal, a US, Ukraine, Russia deal, and it'll go in over the heads of Europe, who will be completely ignored.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating, isn't it, Ben? But Ben, I also want to ask you about the Ukrainian military has now claimed responsibility for striking an oil refinery in Russia on Christmas Day. And we've seen these little attacks happen, haven't we? Tit-for-tat attacks, especially because we saw some bomb blasts in Moscow too, that they are blaming on Ukraine. But the big question here is right now, we're talking about diplomacy, but what is the situation on the battlefield? Because we're hearing conflicting reports. Russia says they're making gains, Ukraine says they're making gains. It's quite difficult to decipher.
Indeed. I mean, unfortunately, the war has become more and more brutal. I should also mention that Christmas Day means nothing to the Russians because they still use the Julian calendar, which means that Christmas doesn't happen until January the 7th. So it's a normal working day yesterday in Russia. But what's happened since the summer is that Ukraine has been disappointed by the lack of military aid, specifically long-range missiles. And what it's done is developed its own long-range drones, which are capable of hitting targets inside Russia. And that started this summer. And what Ukraine is doing is trying to take the war into Russia because so far it hasn't really affected daily lives of people in Russia. It's all been fought in Ukraine. And now Kiev is blowing up oil refineries across Russia, thousands of kilometers away, which is hurting the Kremlin in the pocket because this remains one of its main sources of funding for the war. And this just heightens the tension because Russia's responded with missile strikes, and it has some very powerful missiles, and it's destroyed at least half of Ukraine's power generation capacity. So people are sitting in Kiev, today, in the dark, in the freezing cold, and Russia's threatening to take out substations and actually plunge the entire country into darkness. And this is another factor pushing towards the ceasefires that's going on at the moment, because entire cities in Ukraine could become unlivable if the power is knocked out permanently. So they're bashing each other with sticks, which is one of the impetuses to actually both sides to get this war done, because both sides are bloodying each other's nose each day that this goes on.
Ben Aris, thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating to have you on. And as you say, cautious optimism. We could finally see a deal coming into play this weekend. Once again, I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Now, Myanmar is set to hold its first general election since the military seized power in a coup just 5 years ago. Voting will be held in different parts of the country in 3 phases, with the second and third phases taking place in January. Critics say the vote won't restore the country's democracy nor end its devastating civil war. Patrick Falk has this report.
Calm in Yangon as Myanmar prepares to go to the polls this weekend, even as a civil war rages across swathes of the Southeast Asian nation. Ballots will be cast in 102 of the country's 330 townships, with further rounds due next month. There'll be no voting in 65 townships because of ongoing conflict with ethnic guerrilla groups and resistance forces. Still, the junta government says the election will return Myanmar to a multi-party democracy and bring power back to the people.
In the last couple of years, we have seen the decline of the military junta, the decline in military strength from the Burmese side. They're not 100% weak yet, but I think that this election is a sign that to continue with the civil war like it has always been in the last 4 or 5 years, it's very tough and it's really tiring for the Myanmar military.
The last time an election took place in Myanmar was in 2020, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was annulled by the junta after military generals accused Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy of electoral fraud following its landslide victory. Suu Kyi and many of her party members were detained along with thousands of junta opponents. Critics say the upcoming vote will be neither free nor fair and that power is likely to remain in the hands of military leader Min Aung Hlaing.
The junta's election is designed to prolong the military's power of slavery over people. The military generals are surviving in wealth with impunity to their crimes against the people and ethnic minority groups in the past. So, Min Aung Hlaing and the junta members intend to have their election to save themselves from the crimes they've committed. Their election can be assumed as not only fake and fraud, but it's also a blood-stained scheme. That's why we don't accept it.
Meanwhile, fighting in the country has intensified over the past year. One international monitor showed military air and drone strikes have increased by about 30% compared to the year before. Schools and medical facilities have been hit in near daily strikes. This month, dozens were killed in a strike on a hospital in opposition-controlled Rakhine State. The junta insists the polls have popular support. Spokesperson Zaw Min Tun said the election is being conducted for the people of Myanmar, not for the international community. Experts say many fear the election will only entrench the power of those responsible for a war that's claimed thousands of lives. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya English.
Now to Japan, where the cabinet has approved a record $58 billion defense budget amid rising tensions with China. The plan focuses on coastal defenses, strike-back missiles and unmanned drones, which is part of Tokyo's push to strengthen its military role. China has condemned this very move, saying Japan's growing military capabilities and recent space developments are destabilizing the region. For more on this, I'm joined by Asia political analyst Ross Darrell Feingold. Ross, a pleasure to have you on the show. So why do you think Japan has approved its largest ever defense budget at this particular time?
A number of factors led to this proposal. One, frankly, is pressure from the Trump administration. The first Trump administration put tremendous pressure on Japan, as well as other security partners in Asia like South Korea and the Philippines, to significantly spend more on their own defense. That doesn't mean that the Trump administration is walking away from its treaty obligations, although there's always lots of criticism and speculation in that regard. But the Trump administration has made very clear, we have a treaty obligation, but we expect you to do your part. The other factors are also quite straightforward, which is both China and North Korea present an ever-increasing risk to the security of Japan. And it's understandable, despite the rhetoric that comes out of China or North Korea, it's understandable that Japan is going to respond to that by spending more on their own defense.
And it's really interesting because, like you say, there's many reasons for why this has happened. But how likely is China to respond aggressively to Japan's growing military capabilities and also the space initiatives?
Well, one of the challenges here is, first, we have to understand we're in an arms race here in the Asia-Pacific region, whether that's Northeast Asia as well as Southeast Asia, and also South Asia between India and Pakistan. So the entire region is now in an arms race. But one of the interesting things about this, and it goes to your question, is these countries are going to continue doing what they're doing. So whatever criticism Japan makes verbally about the threat that they perceive from North Korea or China, that doesn't change what those countries do. And similarly, Japan spending more on its defense, or South Korea or Taiwan or the Philippines, that doesn't change what China does. China's going to continue to spend more on its own defense and investing in its capabilities as well. And that leads us to the situation where we are in an arms race in this part of the world. So unfortunately, in many ways, the parties, the countries are talking past each other. They're going to continue to invest more in their defense, and the potential for an armed conflict does increase.
And the US has approved a massive arms sale to Taipei of more than $10 billion. I find it interesting, and I want to ask you, why is America backing Japan militarily when it doesn't recognize Taiwan diplomatically?
Yeah, there are a number of complex issues that come into play with that as well. The U.S. does have a treaty obligation to defend Japan. That is abundantly clear. And again, despite the criticisms of President Trump about his willingness to fulfill those obligations, whether it's NATO or whether it's Japan and South Korea and the Philippines, he will. I think we have to assume that he understands what the U.S. obligations are. At the same time, the U.S. expects a partner like Japan to do its part and to spend more on its national defense. So President Trump's team is basically saying to Japan that we will do our part, but we expect you to do your part as well. And we think that for a very long period of time, you've underfunded your defense. And Japan is responding to that. Not just the current prime minister, she's only been in the job for 2 months, but her predecessors as well, going back to Abe Shinzo and his successors, leading up to the new prime minister, Takaichi. The recent Japan prime ministers have all sought to increase defense spending. Now, with regard to Taiwan, unlike Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, the U.S. does not have a treaty obligation to defend Taiwan. But there is a domestic law in the United States, it's called the Taiwan Relations Act, which requires the United States to make available defensive weapons to Taiwan. And the United States has consistently done that for many decades. And this is basically more of the same. The scope might be larger, the scale might be bigger, but the United States has basically said to Taiwan, similar to what it says to Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, you have to do your part to defend yourself. And the Taiwan government is responding to that by saying, if you'll make weapons available to us, we will buy them.
And I think the big question, Ross, that lots of people are thinking of, and I know it's quite a basic question, but are we going to see Chinese military intervention in Taiwan right now? Can we expect a conflict on the horizon?
This is frankly very scary, especially speaking as somebody who lives in Taiwan. But what I frequently tell my Taiwan friends is you have to assume that there will be armed conflict, because the Chinese government has not given up that possibility. They've made that very clear. They've said, we hope for peaceful unification, but there are certain circumstances under which the Chinese side has said they will use military force. So the right thing for the Taiwan side to do is to prepare accordingly. It's not to assume, some people say, oh, China's a paper tiger. There'll be people who say that, well, China's economy is not growing as fast as it did 10, 15, 20 years ago, which is true. Or there are some people who say that China has corruption problems. That's true. There are some people who say that the generals at the top leadership of the People Liberation's Army have been repeatedly changed in recent years, including the defense minister, which is true as well. But that doesn't change the fact that China has invested enormous amounts of money in its military capabilities. Their capabilities continue to improve. As time goes by, they continue to improve their technology, the ability to conduct joint combat operations across the different theaters and across air and sea and land and the rocket force and cyber. So anyone here in Taiwan who doesn't treat that threat seriously is being a fool. And thus Taiwan really needs to prepare accordingly. And President Lai here in Taiwan is responding to that by proposing significant increases in defense spending.
Ross Darrell Feingold, absolutely fascinating to have you on the show. As always, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the top business news. Silver has hit $75 an ounce for the first time as both precious and industrial metals hit record high. As the year draws to a close, gold has also reached a new peak of over $4,500 per ounce. President Trump has expressed interest in bringing Japan's popular Mini K cars to the US. He has reportedly rolled back regulations, clearing the way for American manufacturers to produce these smaller, more affordable vehicles. K cars are generally cheaper and simpler than the mid to large size cars commonly found on the roads across America. Turning to all the sports news now, and England cricketers are in deep trouble after a chaotic first day of the fourth Ashes test happening in Melbourne. Both teams struggled to score, with players getting out quickly as bowlers took control. England were out for just 110 runs, while Australia were also all bowled out for 152. By the end of the day, Australia were back batting again and hold a narrow lead into the second day of play. Newcastle United's football stadium and training ground plans are in limbo. That's according to head coach Eddie Howe, who says there's a 99.9% chance he'll not be around to see them completed. That comes as the club explores expanding St James Park or building a new stadium as work does continue on the upgrade to the Benton training ground. A quick reminder of our top stories. The US launches Christmas Day strikes against ISIS-linked militants in Nigeria. Zelensky says a meeting with Trump is happening soon as US peace proposals spark talks with Moscow. And Japan approves a record defense budget as tensions with China escalate over space and military developments. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X, and we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with a W News Extra. Goodbye, happy Friday, and thank you for watching.